The skills in Diablo 2 are very poorly balanced, so I always end up using the same ones over and over, which is a shame because there are a lot of cool skills in this game. Even if we stick to just the Sorceress, she has a total of 30 different skills, most of which I never use. But that changes today. Hi, in this video I'm visiting our old friend Mephisto and defeating him with every one of the Sorceress skills. Well, the ones that deal damage anyway, but I do mean every skill that deals damage. I'm also going to time each fight, so in the end I will have ranked all of the skills based on how fast I can beat Mephisto with them. This is the character I'll be using. She is wearing some pretty decent gear that I managed to put together, but nothing crazy. I will list the full gear in the description of the video if you really want the specifics, but I'll summarize the important parts here. The gear adds up to plus 15 to all skills after pre-buffing her with the call to arms that I have on my weapon switch. She has maxed fire, lightning and cold resistances, well over 1k life, 121% faster cast rate and a nice chunk of magic find. Just for the chance to get some cool loot while I'm running Mephisto anyway. Even though it makes some builds less optimized than others, I decided to keep the gear same for every skill. Not only because I'm lazy, but also to make the comparison at the end more fair. Let's begin with my favorite element, the cold skills. I started off with arguably the most popular Mephisto killer, Blizzard. This is my favorite sorcerer skill in the game and possibly the most powerful one. It has a big area of effect and lots of damage. I'm starting the timer once I enter the area and try to defeat Mephisto as fast as possible. This sorceress is strong enough to tank his attacks at point blank range, which should help with landing her spells consistently. There is some randomness to whether Blizzard hits or not, but it doesn't take many hits to take him down. I timed this kill to just under 11 seconds. Let's note that down and start the tracking. For the next spell, let's start from the beginning of the skill tree and give Ice Bolt a try. There was a time long ago in Diablo 2 when there was no respec mechanism in the game, and I think that was the last time that I used Ice Bolt. The damage on the character screen doesn't look too bad though, and because it has 5 synergies, it would be even higher with a few more levels. By the way, all of these runs were done in single player on Hell difficulty with a player setting of 1. I missed a few shots here and there, but the fight was no problem. I stopped the timer on 20.6 seconds. Let's go ahead and add that to the list. I then respec to Ice Blast, which is basically a bigger Ice Bolt with more damage for a bigger mana cost. It also freezes regular enemies rather than just slowing them. I use this skill a lot to spam in between casting Blizzard on my cold sorceress. The single target DPS of this spell is great, and Ice Blast took down Mephisto even faster than Blizzard, with a time under 9 seconds. Next up is Glacial Spike. It's similar to Ice Blast, but it trades some of the damage for some AoE splash damage. It's very useful for freezing groups of enemies, but against Mephisto it should be a strictly worse version of Ice Blast. In case you're wondering how I'm able to respec so many times, I am using a command which works only in single player that allows you to freely respec your character. I'm a big hoarder in Diablo 2, but even I don't have enough respec tokens to cover this experiment. You wouldn't ever use this over Ice Blast against Mephisto, but it really wasn't too bad. I timed this run at 15.2 seconds. Frozen Nova is an awesome spell in my opinion, but I never really use it except as an AoE cold effect while leveling. The main issue with it is that even with maxed synergies and plus 15 to all skills, it doesn't even break 1k damage. To be honest, I had quite low expectations for this, but with a time of 22.7 seconds, I was actually impressed. Maybe there's more to this skill than I thought. And now Frozen Orb, a very popular cold skill. The damage on the character screen is deceptively low, listing only the damage of a single shard out of many that is fired with each cast. Frozen Orb is a bit tricky to aim perfectly, since if I remember correctly you want to try and make the orb explode right on the boss for maximum damage, so it's easy to overshoot or undershoot a little bit. Despite my suboptimal aim, I was able to defeat Mephisto in just over 15 seconds, which puts Frozen Orb in the middle of the cold skills. So that's it for the cold skills. Is what I would have liked to tell you, but the cold hard truth is that 2 of the cold armors deal damage. They aren't offensive spells, but since they can deal damage, they're included. Starting off with Shiver Armor, which in addition to boosting your defense and slowing attackers, also deals damage back to the attacker if it's a melee attack. I wasn't sure how annoying this would be, since I usually don't try and stand within Mephisto's melee range if I can help it, but once you're in range he actually slaps you with his claw hand thing fairly frequently. This did take a long time, but I guess no one expected anything else. The final time ended up being just shy of the 2-minute mark. Honestly, not bad for a defensive armor skill. Chilling Armor is just like Shiver Armor, but the opposite. It only deals damage to range attackers, but it doesn't deal damage instantly, but instead shoots an ice bolt in the direction of the attacker, so it can miss if the enemy moves. I quickly learned that not all range attacks trigger the armor, while some could trigger it multiple times. Like if I ran across Mephisto's charge bolt spell, I could get hit by several projectiles and send a smattering of ice bolts back at him. His lightning attack, however, didn't trigger the armor at all. And he likes to use the lightning spell a lot. And I mean a lot. Just take a look at this clip of a particularly unlucky streak. Yeah, while it did feel like an eternity, in total it was actually faster than the Shiver armor, clocking in at 1 minute and 31 seconds. And now we leave the cold skills behind and take a look at the lightning skills, starting with the best level 1 starter skill, Charged Bolt. The reason this is so good early on is that it's the only level 1 skill with any sort of area damage. Despite the relatively low damage per bolt, even with a lot of skill points, it is also quite good against single targets because of the ability to quote-unquote shotgun, which means that a single enemy can be hit with multiple bolts of the same cost. And even though I couldn't get all of the projectiles to hit, I finished Mephisto in 19 seconds, a perfectly decent time. Then we have the front figure of lightning spells, simply called Lightning. This skill has a really high max damage, which is countered by a very low min damage. Lightning is a pretty cool skill, but I was actually a bit let down by the damage. I expected this to be faster than it was, but it took me over 21.5 seconds. I guess I got tricked by the high max damage number, even though I talked about it just a minute ago. It's also worth noting that some of the lightning spells have slower cast animations than other sorceress skills, and lightning is one of them. Next up we have Chain Lightning, which trades some of Lightning's damage for the ability to bounce around to multiple targets. Since that is of no use against Mephisto, I expected this to be like Lightning, but way worse. And I was completely right. This took more than double the amount of time, ending up at 51.7 seconds. Now a skill that has been significantly improved in Diablo 2 Resurrected, Nova. And it's quite a good skill now. In contrast to the previous two skills, it has a much tighter damage range. In addition, it has a huge area of effect in a circle around the caster and an expensive mana cost. This is more of an area clearing spell than a boss killer though, so I wasn't expecting great results. Nova's timer stops at exactly 44 seconds, and I think this really highlights the power of Cold Mastery, because despite the much lower damage, Frozen Nova had a much quicker kill time thanks to Cold Mastery putting Mephisto's cold resist at -100. Now moving on to Thunderstorm. I always liked the idea behind this skill, having a passive damage dealer that follows you around, kind of how familiars work for the wizard in Diablo 3. It's a bit lackluster in Diablo 2 though, unfortunately, especially since the other skills kill so fast in the endgame that Thunderstorm ends up being barely noticeable. Storming Mephisto down was slow but easy. Since the storms attack on their own, I could concentrate fully on dodging Mephisto's spells. It took Thunderstorm about as long to kill Mephisto as the cold armors, which is a really bad review for Thunderstorm since dealing damage is all it does, 1 minute and 35 seconds. But if you think that was bad, let me introduce you to the final lightning skill, Telekinesis. Every sorceress I have ever played has used this skill, not only as a prerequisite to teleport, but using it to open chests and accessing waypoints without having to walk up to them is such a convenience. The skill isn't meant for combat, but it does unfortunately deal damage, so I have to include it in this experiment. And the damage is really low. Even with all these plus 2 skills and a maxed lightning mastery, it only deals about 200 damage per cost. And as you can see, there's not much happening to Mephisto's health bar. I accepted that this was going to take a while, so I lured Mephisto into the moat trick spot so I could sit back with my finger glued to the right mouse button and wait. And what you see right now was all there was to this battle. After about 5 minutes of thrilling action, I had chipped away about half of Mephisto's health bar. 2 minutes later, I ran out of mana, so I actually had to pause the timer in the middle of the fight to go back to town to refill my potions. A few minutes later though, Mephisto finally went down. The final time ended up being a whopping 11 minutes. I can confidently give you my recommendation to not use this build to farm Mephisto during your next ladder reset. With all of the lightning spells done, it was time to move on to the fire skills. And I'm starting from the beginning with Firebolt. In a way, this is the most popular Sorceress skill, since every Sorceress uses this skill at level 1 thanks to her starting staff. It's never really used after that though, but the damage actually looks pretty decent on paper. I made sure to stand really close to Mephisto to make sure my projectiles hit. He went down in 20 seconds, putting Firebolt right in the middle of the rankings. Next up is Firebolt's bigger brother, Fireball. For an increased mana cost, you get more damage and a splash damage explosion on contact. So it's basically a strictly better skill unless you're allergic to mana potions. This is the normal Fire Sorceress playstyle, teleporting up to enemies' faces and blasting them with Fireball. The AoE component is wasted on a single boss, but the damage was enough to defeat Mephisto in 16.5 seconds. Then we have the second signature spell of the Fire Sorceress, Meteor. This deals huge damage on impact and leaves behind a trail of fire on the ground to deal damage per second. But it has a casting delay, so it's not very spammable, so it's going to be interesting to see how this compares to Fireball. Enemies really need to stand still to maximize Meteor's damage, since there is also a delay between casting the spell and the Meteor landing. The fight went well, and I timed it to just under 20 seconds. Next is a skill I was looking forward to try out since it was also improved in D2R. That skill is Inferno. Inferno has no instant damage and only deals damage per second. The damage is high, but you have to stand completely still and channel the spell, so it's not very practical. The new Inferno also has a ridiculously long range. I'm not going to utilize that though, since it makes it harder to land the spell on my target. Being staggered by Mephisto's damage and being randomly teleported by the Oculus weapon I was using really disrupted Inferno. The damage also wasn't as good as I thought. I guess the per second part of the damage tricked me a bit. The final time ended up being 1 minute and 24 seconds, placing it just outside of the bottom pack. Next up is Blaze, quite an interesting skill. It also only deals damage per second, but it's applied in an interesting way. Blaze also increases your run speed by quite a bit, so I can't help but think that Blaze might actually have found its way into some builds if it was on another class, since the Sorceress already has teleport for superior mobility. I teleported up to Mephisto, activated Blaze, and ran around to spread a nice thick layer of fire. I then lured him in and waited for him to burn. He was defeated after almost 40 seconds, 37.8 to be exact. I really wish Blaze had a place in Diablo 2. I guess you can use it to write subtle messages on the ground in fire. Now let's take a look at Firewall, another damage per second spell with big damage numbers. AoE on this is weird. The wall is very wide but very thin. If enemies move just a little bit, the whole attack misses. Firewall also has a cost delay, but it's shorter than the duration, so you can partially stack them on top of each other. I managed to keep Mephisto in one spot and Firewall took him down in just 15 seconds. Quite impressive, I thought. And just to be sure I didn't lie about the stacking before, I did another run to test it out, and it looks like it does stack when two firewalls are overlapping. And as you can see from this test, Firewall can make great use of the moat trick, so if you insist on using the skill instead of Meteor or Blizzard, it can work quite well. Well, Enchant is technically an enchantment and not a damage spell, but it does have a damage number attached to it, so I'll include it. When I cast Enchant on myself, you can see that my damage shows as way higher than what the Enchant tooltip says, and that's because of Fire Mastery. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but if I understand correctly, it somehow double dips on the buff to give fire damage applied to your attacks a massive boost. But even with the massive attack rating boost from Enchant, I still only will hit Mephisto about a third of the time with this setup. This was looking to be another challenging skill to complete. It turned out I was absolutely right, but my chance to hit wasn't the biggest issue. The random teleport from the Oculus, combined with the extremely slow attack speed, made this fight super annoying. I gave it a good try, but I aborted the run once my potions ran out. For round 2, I allowed myself to use the call to arm sword that I had on my weapon switch. It is technically included in the gear setup that I was using. The call to arms also has a 40% increase to attack speed, which was a really nice bonus, and getting rid of the random teleport made a big difference. It didn't turn me into a boss slayer or anything, but after a little over 3 minutes, Mephisto went down. I clocked the run at 3 minutes and 16 seconds, noted the time down, and then it was finally time to move on to the final skill, Hydra. Hydra's always used to suck, like really badly, but it's actually a decent skill now in D2R. The biggest change it received was the ability to summon 6 of them at the same time instead of just a single one. And I believe the damage was also significantly increased. I tanked Mephisto to keep him in one place, while my 6 fire-breathing Hydras made short work of him. I noted Hydra down for 16.7 seconds, and with all the skills done, let's sort them by runtime and see if there's anything that sticks out. The final list, sorted by runtime, looks like this. The method I used in this video isn't in any way perfect, so I don't think you can use this as evidence that one skill is objectively better than another, except for Telekinesis, that has solidified its place at the bottom. Though I guess this wasn't really a secret, the only thing that seems worth commenting on to me is that lowering enemy resistances is really powerful, as shown by Cold Mastery, more than making up for the cold skill's overall lower damage. This clearly shows when comparing Nova to Frozen Nova and when comparing Firebolt to Icebolt, but as I said in the beginning, I used the same gear for every skill, while in reality both Fire and Lightning builds can of course also lower enemy resistances through different gear options. If you like this style of video where I compare stats, I recommend that you take a look at this video next, where I run Mephisto hundreds of times to compare how many uniques you find with different amounts of magic find. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.